Thank you, comrades. What great speeches. So much information, and we're all looking forward to hearing many, if not most of you, in the various workshops later on today and tomorrow. I want to talk about a contradiction. I want to close this section talking about a contradiction that is inevitable, that we face as communists, as militants, wherever we are, whether we're in a trade union in Boston, for example, or organizing youth in North Carolina somewhere, all over the state, or in the Bay Area, or in Detroit. We are obliged to know everything about our locality, to be steeped in the local issues, to know the major players, to know the unions, their strengths, their weaknesses, to know the organizations and the coalitions and everything that affects the course of the struggle, which is uneven. And that's a lot. And that's enough to fill one human brain for quite a while, seemingly not leaving a lot of space for other things, like the bigger questions. What's going on in the world? Where's the crisis going? What does Athens have to do with Philadelphia, or Madrid, or Gaza, with some struggle against raising rents where I live? Well, comrades, the bad news, it's not bad news, because as revolutionaries, our DNA is to rise to the occasion. Can I get a witness? We really have no choice but to have two levels of consciousness, actually many levels of consciousness, multi-levels of consciousness simultaneously, to be concerned about the struggles that we're in and that our allies are in, and know their consciousness, which oftentimes is limited. That's not a put down. That's, being determined consciousness. If you're being evicted, you know where your consciousness is, But also have that global consciousness. We must have it, comrades. We can't have an unnecessary division between those who are fighting in the communities and those who are sitting up somewhere discussing big issues historically and analytically, using Marxism or whatever else, and seeming to be apart from the masses. Maybe to some extent you're going to get that. But our job as a revolutionary party of the working class, most importantly the most oppressed, is to minimize that dichotomy. Not to do things that, there are those who are up here somewhere and there are those who are in the trenches. We have to do this in order to proceed. We're going to hear a lot about the so-called fiscal cliff. Someone will break that down. I'm not going to break it down. It's austerity. It's worldwide austerity. We're coming after your pension. We're coming after health care. We're coming after wages. We're coming after your taxes. We're coming after you. We're going to crush you in a very real human way. That's what the fiscal cliff is in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, in Ireland, in South Africa, all throughout Latin America, and here in the U.S., And it's, from the point of view of the capitalists, they're not even sure whether it's going to work. The idea is to try to fix their system on the backs of the workers they can't get it from profits because of overproduction. So let's just go right literally into the body of the workers and get more pounds of flesh by stealing things from them. Only making the workers more destitute and leaving them in no condition to buy all the bullshit that you've overproduced. Right. So it makes things worse, but they don't know what else to do. They don't know what else to do, so they cut and slash. It's a mad, insane exercise in destruction, social destruction. It really should be called the terminal crisis of capitalism, Cliff. Yes. And as any number of comrades have already said, very eloquently and convincingly, it's getting worse. It's getting worse everywhere you look. Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, Europe. As Fred just said, they just pronounced Europe to officially be in recession. This was not a surprise to the working class there. Really, it's more like a depression in Southern Europe. And I look at France and Germany too, you know, they're a little bit better off, but things are going downhill. In places like Greece and Spain and Portugal and Italy, workers who a year ago had a job with a pension not only don't have that job, maybe don't have a home, they're starving. And they're scrounging garbage cans for food. You can read that in Workers' World. You can also read it in the New York Times. They found, space for that, And it's coming here. It's coming here, comrades. It's already here. Go to Detroit. Go to any number of places. It's coming here with a vengeance. And it's going to bring unemployment as well as austerity, which for some time may be the main thing that we're fighting, the cutbacks. I want to talk about something that I consider to be fairly remarkable. A couple of the other speeches already alluded to it. Larry Hales alluded to it. I think Teresa may have alluded to it. I think everybody alluded to it, actually. What happened in Europe a couple of days ago? Now, it didn't get the bourgeois coverage that it deserved. And maybe that's because they didn't occupy something or didn't burn down something, which they should. But there was the first pan-European strike against austerity on Thursday, November 14th. 23 countries participated in it. Not all of them had general strikes. I think the general strikes were in Greece and Spain and Portugal. Some workers may have gone on strike in Italy and Belgium. Other places there were 4-hour work stoppages. Other places there were just demonstrations. I don't know what happened in Germany, and it's interesting. We should find out. And what happened in the UK? See, because they try to divide the European workers. The northern, generally speaking, more privileged European workers against the southern European workers who are in a state of desperation and depression. But this was the first attempt at a pan-European workers' action. I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but it's a big step. And they fought about it in the labor unions. The more conservative labor leaders said, well, it's a waste of time. We need to be negotiating the best deal we can get. Why have this pan thing? We're not negotiating with the European Parliament. We're negotiating with our local bourgeoisies. You fight your bourgeoisie, I'll fight mine, which is the way it usually is. This is a waste of money. But ultimately, it was won and it was agreed upon to have, or at least to attempt to have, a pan-European workers' action. I'll tell you who was looking at it. I don't know whether out of envy or concern. In addition, well, the U.S. bourgeoisie certainly wasn't envious of it. But I know a lot of militant trade unionists in this country were looking over there and saying, And wouldn't it be good if we did that another time? And guess what? What if we're involved? What if the U.S. working class is involved? Not just the unions, but however the workers and the oppressed are organized. Unemployed, women, anti-war, everybody. The youth who have organized themselves. It shows you, comrades, that the workers are being forced by the crisis to find new ways of fighting for their life and fighting for their rights. The problem is, as wonderful as this pan-European workers' action was, obviously it's not enough. It must go further. And what's necessary, and this is a theme that I've raised with some of you before, is a complete revival of the revolutionary socialist perspective amongst the vanguard organizations and in the working class. What do I mean by that? For so many years now, it has been the perspective in the working class movement, even amongst the best elements. We can't make a revolution. That seems, we'll talk about it when we give speeches at conferences, and it's coming, and one day, and socialists, and rah, 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 rah. But in the real world, since we don't see it on the horizon, we fight a more limited battle to defend workers' interests, for reforms. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. And anybody who tells you that is not helpful, frankly. And I can't imagine that they'll be helpful to anybody anywhere fighting for anything. However, when you have a crisis of this magnitude, Fred calls it capitalism at a dead end. I'll raise them. Terminal crisis. Terminal crisis of capitalism. When you have a crisis of this magnitude, it changes the way that the imperialists are fighting you. They're no longer interested in negotiating with you anymore. They want to rip up contracts and rip up your unions. And they're just not fighting you on a local level. They're very global. They're very centralized. Even though they may be fighting each other on a certain level, they're highly centralized. And when they are coming after you with carpet bombs, here, Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, it's hardly effective for us to be having little guerrilla battles. Each country, each city, each region. See? That's going to take place, and that's inevitable. I'm not taking anything away from that. Please hear me. But we have to have a perspective of being able to rise to the assault that is upon us. Part of that is reviving the revolutionary perspective. We know all too much, the minimum program. Defend Social Security, defend Medicare, defend my housing, defend my job, defend my union. But comrades, it's time to dust it off. Take it out of the closet or wherever it's been hiding. And say it's time for socialist revolution on a worldwide basis. And it's not just rhetoric. It sounds like rhetoric, but that orientation informs how we fight. If the working class movement, to some extent, is imbued with that revolutionary maximum unlimited program, even though that might seem distant, it tends to fight a wider, broader, more militant, more internationalist kind of struggle. Comrades and friends, history tells us this. And that's what we need now. The Occupy movement, which I think we owe a lot to. I'm repeating myself, but it bears repeating. They've got contradictions. They had, generally speaking, very little knowledge of oppressed people and the national question, and I probably didn't mean a lot to them, and they were very chauvinist and arrogant, and some of them have evolved and gotten better. Do you think so? Yes. And others, we don't care, what happens to them, because it's a question as to whether they're going to be helpful anyway, I think that this Occupy movement, I'm not just talking about in this country, but it's a worldwide movement of youth, generally speaking, with all of its contradictions, is on a higher level is on a higher level than the anti-globalization movement that it seems to resemble, but it really is different. This is a part of the working class. May not look like it, may resemble Seattle, and not that Seattle was all bad, just had a lot more problems. But this Occupy movement is a part of the working class rebelling. Mostly youth rebelling because capitalism no longer promises them a future, and so they have said, fuck you. We're learning things. Just to popularize Occupy. You don't just have to demonstrate. You just don't have to march. Guess what? You can sit in someplace. You can take over what is yours anyway. What the workers learned from Europe and from other parts of the world and did in many instances, you all know what your knowledge of history, all over the Midwest and the auto workers and the steel workers and the Teamsters, and more recently, the workers in Chicago. I was wondering whether it was on the minds of the workers in Hostess. They got so many factories that are now closing. Also, the Occupy movement reminds us that the working class is changing. It's changing in form and shape. It's more malleable. It's more flexible. It doesn't look like a stereotype that you might have of the working class 20, 30, or 40 years ago. It's not just organized by trade unions. It's not just regional. It's not just movements. I really wish, of course, there are movements, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement, organized workers movement, unemployed movement, immigrant rights movement. But as we should look at them separately, with all due respect for what is distinct about each movement, we should also look at them as detachments of one class and not many movements. We are not just many movements. We are many movements that make up one class. And all of the boundaries that seem to divide all of these movements, we've got to work hard to eradicate them because they're not helpful. In some ways, I think OWS helped that. OWS helped push labor here until the elections came and threw a cold water on it. Also, with my limited understanding, I believe it was the Occupy movements in Europe that really fought for, I don't know if they were satisfied with it, probably not, but they fought for this perspective of a pan-European workers' strike. One of the things that pushed some of the unions, and many unions agreed to it, some did more than others. One of the reasons is because about a month ago, the youth in Europe, actually it was global. They called a demonstration against austerity. I think they called it global noise. Have you ever heard of that? Yeah. There was some that was a buildup. That was to push larger and larger sections of the working class to do something bigger. And what happened Thursday was that. We've got to look at our working class differently. We've got to have a fresh, revolutionary look at this. And this is not just coming from Larry Holmes, our Workers' World. This comes directly from Karl Marx. He broke it down when he talked about, the different stages of trade union development based on the level of the productive forces. At this highly messed up state of world capitalist permanent crisis, when things are so global now, and it's clear that, in most instances, you'll only get so far struggling in a limited way. The more flexible and inclusive and militant revolutionary sense of the reconfiguration of the working class makes sense. It makes more sense, especially if it's more global. We should look at the elections. A big problem, big turnoff, hard to have a demonstration during an election. Democratic Party just sucks out all the air, all the energy, and all the resources, frankly. out of most every movement. If you stay alive as a movement during the presidential elections, it's a hard struggle. And having said that, though, we did learn something, and it's interesting. The masses are changing. The demographics of the working class are changing, and it's all for the good if we're looking forward. This was the first time that an African-American president was reelected based on an electorate that was 45% oppressed people. Latinos, African-American, Asian, women, LGBT, and so forth. Actually, Obama won 80% of those demographics. He only won 39% of the white votes. This is a cultural and political shock to the white supremacists. I don't want to make a big thing out of it. It's still the Democratic Party. It's still tweedly-dum, tweedly-die. We're being led into the darkness on top. But below, comrades, wow. Wow, that's significant. It bodes well for the future. All the states where same-sex marriage was enacted, the first openly lesbian woman senator. Actually, I didn't know this, but what's her name? The head of the Democratic Congressional Caucus, not a progressive, Pelosi, part of the Democratic machine. But she announced that this was the first time that the Democratic Congressional Caucus, the majority was women. It's not revolutionary, but it's a big change. It's a big change. The problem is that it's trapped in this bourgeois party. It needs to break out. It's trapped in this bourgeois party that says, don't fight, don't occupy, don't demonstrate. We'll go and get a grand bargain for you. That will seem like it's better than the Republicans, but really you're getting it. Imagine if the demographics that were displayed in the election were in the street, flexing their muscle together. Now, wouldn't that be something? And that's what's necessary. That's what the People's Power Assembly needs to do. I want to end up, because I've gone too long, just talking a little bit about our perspective. First, the party. Our party makes no claim to leading the working class. We're too small for that. The only claim we can make is to our history. We have a proud history of struggle, political and ideological struggle, militant struggle, exemplary struggle on all the issues, particularly the most difficult, particularly when it comes to defending the most oppressed and the national question and women and LGBT and fighting side by side with the Palestinians, and being, fearless opponents of imperialism from Gaza to Haiti and everywhere else to the occupied South. But like everybody else who considers himself a revolutionary, a true revolutionary, we're still struggling to keep our head above water as we have survived what some consider a desert of political and reaction that's finally breaking up. But I will submit this to you, comrades and friends. Our party can play a helpful role in reviving the revolutionary perspective and in this country and worldwide. We can because of what we're made of. We can because of what we're made of. We're revolutionary, we're honest. We have not an ounce of stupid sectarian bullshit in our bones. We are not interested in pseudo-polemics to make ourselves look good or just to put down somebody else. We'd rather sit down and see if we can make common cause. And if we can't, we can't. We move on. We feel that we can be helpful to uniting socialists. We're still excited about what happened about 3 years ago in Venezuela when the Socialist Party there had a conference. They invited other socialists and communists, and we're talking about forming a Fifth International. I don't know where that happened, but we were all happy about it, knowing full well that it probably had a lot of contradictions and complications and probably was premature, but what a great idea. Most of us are not old enough to miss the Comintern. That was the Third International, which was disbanded about 70 years ago for various reasons. A lot of it was the imperialist war. I'm not going to go into that, but wow. Wouldn't it be great if we had that? Maybe it's premature. That's a fair, sensible argument. The state of the working class organizations, its communist parties, its vanguard organizations, perhaps are not enough. But on the other side, our class struggle has always been global, and it has never been more transparently, obviously global than today. So we have to have a global perspective. Otherwise, we're in the dark. We feel the party can help with others. And finally, with the People's Power Assemblies, we're going to try hard with our friends all around the country to push this project, to make it a revolutionary democratic project and an instrument of struggle. We think we've learned something from the youth in OWS, and many of them will be with us, and that we can, in many ways, proceed from what they've already accomplished, getting deeper and deeper into the most oppressed sections of our class, who, generally speaking, were not that well represented in the Occupy movement, with some notable exceptions. We will fight on the local basis, the national basis, and the international basis. And if we do this, if we are successful, even somewhat successful, among other things, we will play a role in breaking up the stranglehold of the Democratic Party on this wonderful multinational proletariat in this country, which wants to come and not only make revolution here, but help the whole world make socialist revolution. Thank you.